So today we're joined by Kerim, Senior Developer Advocate at HashiCorp, and Lawrence, Product Engineer at Incident IO, to talk about the many ways that teams can make incident management less stressful and painful. So before we get started, I figured it would be a good idea to get everybody acquainted with exactly what each of your backgrounds are. So Kerim, let's start with you. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up at HashiCorp?
Of course. Hey folks, my name is Kerim. I'm a senior developer advocate at HashiCorp. We're focused on infrastructure and orchestration tooling. So in terms of products, that's Terraform, which is one of our most famous ones. And of course, Nomad, which is a workload orchestration tool. Prior to HashiCorp, I worked on pretty much like operational teams for the past 5, 6 years, helping organizations embrace DevOps mentalities, helping with automation, leading teams there, and just making sure we build stuff that doesn't break. We had many incidents during those times, so I'm absolutely qualified to talk about what not to do.
I'm Lawrence. I'm a product engineer at Incident IO. So I joined Incident IO about 2.5, maybe a bit more years ago now as the first employee. So it was just myself, Stephen, Pete, and Chris. That means that over the last 2.5 years, I've been involved in building out much of the features that we have. So if you've not heard of us, Incident IO being an incident response platform, that means we have the ability to respond to incidents inside of Slack and then run them from your web dashboard, send updates, coordinate people during the incident, and then also hook into your alerting tools and receive everything into our platform so that you can then coordinate your response to the incident from there on out. So my background had, before Incident IO, I'd been working as a principal site reliability engineer at a company called GoCardless. So GoCardless were about 800, 900 people when I left, and I've been there since about 35 people at the start. So in that time, I'd seen the company kind of go from kind of smaller than Incident IO is nowadays to much, much, much bigger. And along the way, dealt with my fair share of incidents, especially being in the SRE space. So, databases falling over, or like, honestly, in the financial industry, a lot worse incidents sometimes. So yeah, came into Incident IO with I know what incidents are. I know what I think the pain points are here. I've got a wealth of experience trying to deal with them. I'd love to try and turn that into a product. And that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years, I guess.
Gotcha. And if both of you had to guess, how many incidents have you managed? Lawrence, let's start with you.
Yeah.
Sorry
I
to put
mean,
both of you on the spot.
no. I think our product actually tracks this. I think whilst that incident, I think I've been in probably about 400 incidents ish that I've been involved in.
Okay.
We use incidents for like smaller scale things here as well. But I think before that at GoCardless, maybe like, I don't know, once a week, once every other week or something, I'd be involved. So you're talking hundreds, if not about 1,000 incidents at this point. So enough, I think.
Kerim.
Yeah, I think the ratio of once every 2 weeks checks out. New security incidents, vulnerabilities that need to be taken care of, and of course, stuff that was committed that wasn't ready to be rolled out and had to be reworded.
Gotcha.
So
Lawrence, one thing that I'm actually really curious about, you just mentioned that you were an SRE. Has your perspective on incident management changed at all now that you're sort of behind the scenes at an incident management company? Just like wondering if, like in theory, this will allow you to better understand like customer pain points and exactly what it is that we need to build to provide like the best incident management experience for companies. So just say, yeah, wondering very, very generally if being here has changed your perspective at all.
Yeah, I think if anything, it strengthened my conviction. So actually, the first time I came across Incident, it was when I think it was Pete and Stephen working on it as like a hobby project.
Yeah.
And I've known Pete for a long while, and he contacted me and said, "Hey, do you want to have a look at this thing that we've been building? It's called Pineapples." That's a placeholder name. Don't worry, we'll change. And I think at the time it was a very basic version of a Slack bot to manage incidents. So really early stage, create the channel, store all the stuff in it for an incident. But even then, at the time, I was leading a couple of teams, of which one of them was an SRE team, and they've been considering at GoCardless using something like Netflix's Dispatch or Monzo's response bot. And I was super keen for them not to do that, just because like, I didn't want them to run it. I wanted someone else to run this for them. It felt like something that someone else should provide. So I saw this product that like P and Stephen were working on, and I went like, God, I want that. So I was one of the first people to actually end up buying this because I thought that there was such a core and obvious need for the team that I was working with at the time. And I guess at the time when they then said, "Hey, do you maybe want to come work at the company as well?" I was like, "Well, obviously I can see how this works for us, and it definitely solves like the problems that I've seen in my career." But now having joined the company and seen incident response at literally hundreds of some of the largest companies out there as well, like across small and large companies, I've only become more convinced that this is a problem that has a generic solution, or at least like we can provide a solution to people that will work in a lot of different situations. So yeah, having now seen the same problems that I was experiencing in my career borne out in all different types of industries, from like streaming services to I don't know like smaller companies or even HashiCorp, I can say now like yes, this is a tool and processes that everyone can benefit from. I guess maybe, yeah, that's how my perspective has changed.
Is there a part of you that says, "Oh my god, like I know exactly how to fix that thing, and like I've seen that you've been dealing with this incident for like a few hours now, and I just want to jump in and help you"? Is there any part of you that wants to sort of like fight fires for people, if that makes sense?
Linear had a really great, I say great outage. It's kind of never good to describe it as that, but they had a outage a couple of weeks ago about database issues where a migration had gone wrong and they lost a lot of data. And like we were following along because Linear used our status page and they were putting all their updates on it. And it was honestly just a case study in how you should do public comms in that situation. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think if you've been in a lot of incidents before, you do watch them, and probably more often than I would hope, you're like, oh, I wish you could do, more here, or I wish you were a bit more on point with your concept. Thankfully, I think Linear did a really great job. So it was more just like, oh wow, these guys are really, really good at incident response, and it was great to watch it play out. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So obviously, between the two of you, you have thousands of incidents under your belt. So I want you to go back in time a little bit and highlight maybe one incident that really like highlighted the value of having a good incident management process. Kareem, let's start with you.
Ooh, going back in time. So I'll go back to, this is probably like 2012, 2013. I worked at an ad tech company. We had an issue with a database migration. We decided to migrate some data from one cluster, a MongoDB cluster, to another. And the process should have worked out, but of course it didn't. So we paused it. And so I was scheduled to go on vacation the week after. I was climbing back then. And we decided to pause everything because, like we were almost there, almost certain it was going to work out, but we didn't want to rush it. It's kind of like, don't deploy on Fridays, don't make database changes when half of your team, I represented that half, is going to be gone for the next week. Monday morning, my colleague comes in, and I want to be very clear. This is not about blaming anyone. This is absolutely about lacking good tools, lacking a good process. My colleague decides that, you know what, I'm just going to finish this. It's going to be a nice surprise when he comes back and finds out everything is finished. And the intention there was good, right? We love people that pick up our slack. As it happens, I'm climbing and I feel my backpack starting to vibrate, which is usually not a good thing because when I was climbing, everyone knew I was climbing and my backpack keeps vibrating. So as I'm doing the second pitch of my route, take a quick break, I grab my phone and I see my colleague is calling me, and like 20 missed calls, something like that. First thought is, okay, something happened that is so critical that one, he's calling me while I'm climbing, two, he's calling me on vacation, which it was a startup, but we had a strong rule. If you're on vacation, you don't call people, or you don't call them. They can still call you, of course. So here I am hanging off the mountain, probably 50 meters up in the air, very secure. Take security very seriously, and grab my phone, call him, and ask, what is the problem? He ran a change mods command and basically locked himself out of one of the servers. and just wasn't able to SSH into it anymore. So we walked through the process of unmounting the disk, mounting it on a different server, fixing the permissions and everything. And here I'm stressing out, like, what if my phone falls down? I'm going to be really sad if that happens. My phone was, I think that was the first or second iPhone that I had back then. Really didn't want to lose it. And while all my gear is secured, my phone is not secured. So here we are dealing with an incident, the two of us. He didn't want to bring it up to anyone else to not stress them out. Meanwhile, my heart is pumping, and we're just wondering, how can we do this better in the future? Of course, we had zero incident management tooling. We took some notes, we took some text messages. I think we used WhatsApp or something like that to take notes. All in all, we lost so much insight into what we could have done better, into timestamps, into everything, and all the solutions that we tried and didn't work, that we couldn't learn from this kind of incident if we wanted to, because we just didn't have the training material. So that was probably the one that, still stresses me out thinking about it.
Did you finish the climb?
We finished the climb,
Okay.
made it to the top, and put my hand in a bee's nest. So that was
Literally
into a bee's nest. Luckily, pulled back quickly enough to not get stung too many times. But this was not overall a great and relaxing experience, as climbs should be.
No, that sounds awful.
Yeah.
Lawrence, what about you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff in that I think echoes with what comes to mind when I'm thinking of an incident where it could have done with a much more sophisticated or mature level of process, I guess, to help us work through it. So I think my example comes from pretty early in my career, almost a decade ago now, where again I was working at Go Carlos, and we used to submit big batches of payments to the banks that would then get processed. So they're big direct debit batches. And it happened that one evening our batch had failed, and I was probably the only one in the office. I think I wasn't the only one, actually. So Pete, our CTO, who also happened to be at Go Carlos at the time, he was the only person who was also in the office, and he ended up buddying with me as we walked through trying to get this batch of many, like tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of SEPA European credit or debit payments through the system. So we took a couple of different strategies to try and get that thing through. And we were just discussing it, chatting, and we weren't really recording what we were doing because we were like, well, we're just trying to brainstorm and there's some urgency because we need to hit the deadline for the banks. And it was really late as well. It was like 8 or 9 p.m. Like, as I said, we were the only ones there. So obviously everything that we did there kind of got lost. It went into the ether, which is not what you want for an incident response that goes well. And it probably wouldn't have been a problem except for about 3 days later when all the payments that were in that batch that we went and resubmitted started failing. And we knew because our support line was lighting up because loads of customers are calling in going, hey, like all the payments I took on this day, they're marked as failed in my account. And I think that's the oh dear, something has gone wrong moment. But at this point, I think unusually for that time, I was working at home. So I wasn't in the office and I didn't quite clock that this was going on. And the people who were dealing with it didn't, because we, like Pete and I had just dealt with this ourselves the previous day. They didn't know what we'd done a few days earlier. So they're panicking and trying to figure out what on earth might have happened there. And it took an hour or two for my manager to actually find me and go, hey, by the way, I think we have an incident that might be related to something you did the previous night. So yeah, it was like, we ended up resolving it, and it turned out like we had submitted the batch through the second batch, and that had gone through, but the batch ID from the first batch was the one that we received rejection reports for, which then failed all the payments that never even got submitted in the first batches. It's a nightmare, never worked with banking systems. But I guess it kind of highlighted for me that doing this stuff quietly in the evenings without going through a proper process meant that all the work that we'd done and all the thought processes that we'd gone through was totally invisible to the people who had to deal with this incident later. I think it was a particularly bad example because it's kind of the incident happens several days after the thing that might have caused it. So you have some time to delay, or like that memory fades. So people will kind of let it fall out of their heads. Whereas if you have a proper process and you run a post-mortem, hopefully it's a bit more present and clear in people's minds when the thing comes up. And then yeah, like just having a historical record that Pete and I have been on that incident would have been really nice. That probably would have helped us solve it a lot faster. So yeah, lots there to learn from. I do it a lot differently now, but it definitely comes to mind as one that could have benefited from a more sophisticated process.
I think what's really, really interesting is that having a good incident management process just feels like the right thing to do. But in many instances, like companies just aren't prioritizing it. So I think back, to all the sales calls that I've listened to here at Incident IO, where the what question will be asked. Okay, so like, why are you looking for an incident management tool? And the response very often is, yeah, well, we don't really have anything in place right now. We kind of just like talk over Slack or Teams or whatever the medium is, and like it feels like these companies are just one really, really, really bad incident away from just like realizing, hey, we need something right now. And I think to like, for myself, I think of like training for a marathon or training for a half marathon. So last year I signed up for a half marathon. I knew well in advance that this is something that I needed to train for. Did I train for it? No, of course not. I just showed up on the day. I ran it in 3 hours or whatever. And the entire time afterwards, I'm like, oh my God, that was awful. That was awful. Of course it was, because I didn't train for it. So anyway, long-winded way of asking, like, why do you think that companies don't prioritize uh, a good incident management process before things, totally go haywire?
I'll go first if you don't mind. So biggest thing I see is I've mainly worked with startups and startup-like organizations inside enterprises, where the larger company wants this team to be as quick to respond to something as a startup. And then it's always high speed, low drag, not a lot of processes, not a lot of documentation, hardly any testing. These are all the things that you can save money on. And I'm making air quotes just outside the frame of the camera, but you can save money on them until stuff goes wrong. At which point, all the money you saved goes into an all hands on deck situation where you're trying to solve that incident or incidents, because usually there's not just a single thing that went wrong. There's usually a litany of things. And of course, because you haven't properly documented everything, nobody has an idea how to solve it all.
Lawrence?
Yeah, I think there's this weird psychology when it comes to incidents where, I mean, we're really keen at incident on setting weekly goals, and not just weekly goals, but daily goals. Everyone's focused on what are we trying to do this week that will make our customers' lives better. What product are we going to ship? Things like that. Incidents, almost by their very definition, are like the work that you didn't plan to do. So when you have a company that's super focused on what they came into work to do this week, when you have an incident and it pulls you away from doing that stuff that you really wanted to do, your natural inclination is to try and, as soon as you possibly can, return to the thing that you were planning on doing so that you can try and hit those goals. So I think like when incidents catch you at your worst is when you end up spending kind of all the time that you'd hope to spend on other stuff on the incident, and that makes it very hard as a sell to the person when it gets to the end of the incident to invest yet more time in trying to improve their process or do like a post-mortem sort of thing. So yeah, it's just like you find people at the point when they're least willing to try and invest in an instant response is when an incident happens. Um, it's also that the costs like appear very differently. When you're bad at responding to incidents, it often ends up manifesting as your projects will take more varied amounts of time. So estimations become more difficult because like people should be working on the product, but they keep being pulled away into unplanned incidents. So a lot of this is like, if you don't have a process, this is invisible work. So you don't even know that you're spending time on it. It's very hard to then balance that and quantify it against the investment that you need to improve it and try and understand how much of your time you're actually spending on product work or planned work versus unplanned work. So yeah, it's hard to measure, and yeah, can catch you at your worst.
Yeah. And like, what is the value in responding to incidents? So like, Kareem, you mentioned you're climbing, and long story short, your hand ends up in a bee's nest, and you're the rest of your climb is ruined. And Lawrence, you're responsible for like making sure that payments are going through well. This all seems incredibly stressful and like a situation that no one wants to be in. So what do you, as a responder, get out of responding to incidents? Kerim, let's start with you.
I think one there's for many engineers, I think there's this hero complex of wanting to be the one that saves the team,
Yeah.
even though usually the work is thankless. You could have prevented having that work in the first place by doing it properly. But ultimately, if you're the one building it, you're uniquely qualified to fix it. So you really just made your own life a lot harder. I think anytime you have a chance to be in an incident with a good incident commander that knows how to lead their process, it's amazing. There's so many companies out there that will train you on this, not just in the way that Incident IO, the platform, works, but in an IT variation of the in the US, it's called the National Incident Management System. So it's what firefighters use and hazmat crews. There's so many analogies in there to our work as site reliability engineers, and it's insane to compare how we operate and how we prepare our areas versus how they prepare their areas of work. And ultimately, we're trying to reinvent the wheel with a lot of things. Companies, I think Lawrence mentioned it earlier, you don't want to run this kind of tool on your own. When I have an incident, I don't want to have to first fix my incident tooling. I just want to be taking notes. I want my comms team to be able to go in there, see what's happening. I want them to be able to understand the severity of it. I want the PMs that are involved to be able to just dig in and find the information they need. I think that's, to me, is the most important thing, because if you can see what's going on, what's broken, you don't have to bother me, which means I can probably focus on fixing the incident. We can always chat in more detail later, but while the incident is ongoing, engineering focus should be on solving the issue. So take part in that process and learn from it.
Lawrence?
Yeah, I agree with like all of that. the like it's such a great opportunity for you when you're working in incidents to learn from other people, especially the people who get brought into incidents are typically the people who can work really fast in a complex situation, and they tend to be the people who know how to do this stuff best. Like you're working with the best people at the role that you normally do, and that's an exceptional way to learn and up level yourself. I guess if I was talking to an individual who was like, I don't know why I would want to be involved in incidents, I think actually selling them on the fact that this is a massive career progression opportunity for them is something I find usually is quite successful. So it's not just that you're working with people to learn the technical elements of the incident, but it's also when an incident happens, you pull in people from across the company that you don't often work with. So you're working with maybe executives who are making calls on how you're going to handle the incident, but also with your support team. If you're an engineer, maybe you don't talk with them that much, but this allows you to kind of build your network in the company and learn how your organization works. That's like a key part of incident response. It's not just the technical element, it's about using your organizational levers. That stuff is hugely beneficial to you, both in terms of learning how to get things done in your org, but also from a visibility and career progression angle. So, yeah, it's not just if we don't fix this, the company will maybe not survive, which I think is a pretty decent motivator for most people. But it's also personally, there's a lot to be taken, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I can imagine that this is highly context based, but what would you say ultimately determines how much organizations should be investing into incident management? Lawrence, let's start with you.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think invisible costs are probably one of the biggest curses of incident response. It's really hard to
Yeah.
track this stuff sometimes. So one thing that we do through the product, and one thing that I advocate now to people who do run incidents, is we track the amount of hours people spend on incidents over time. So what you end up with is a big graph that goes, for your team, how many hours are we spending this month dealing with incidents in hours, out of hours, when people are sleeping. So you can end up quantifying both the kind of the cost that you're applying to your engineers or other people who are on call, in terms of how much distraction are they receiving during the day, and maybe even how many times are we waking them up at night, because that does have an impact and it does affect their ability to work maybe the next day, or how fresh they're going to be. So I think at the end of the day, I think the brass tacks for incidents is how long are you spending working on the stuff that like the incident response rather than advancing your product. And I think tracking the hours spent is probably the most honest and accurate way of getting an understanding of how much this is costing you, at which point that's when you start asking, well, does it make sense for me to invest in? Almost always there's something that you can invest in to try and bring those hours down.
Yeah.
Karim?
Kareem?
I think it's very much the invisible cost. I remember for a couple of incidents that I was in, for no other reason than having access to an API, we started tracking the data from the wearables of the team that we were in. So I had like one of those, I think, Jawbone sleep trackers. I wanted to see how my sleep was affected. We did it for the rest of the team. We realized that, hey, you know what? We all went from having okayish nights to 5 hours at best, which is not sustainable during the work week. And then on the weekends, we would still get together and try to fix more. And of course, Sunday at 4 p.m., you call it quits because the incident is resolved, and you decide to take a nice evening, and you think on Monday you're good to go. The thing is, you're not. You didn't recuperate. You didn't have time to process what's happening, but you're still just running. And it's like, I think, to use the marathon example, imagine signing up for a half marathon, and then somebody goes like, "JK, it's actually 5 miles more." And
Please don't say that.
I know, right?
Please don't say that.
You just don't want it. The invisible cost, mentally, physically, it's a lot cheaper to invest into not having to pay that cost beforehand, by building a good flow, by training, by making sure you're good to go and you have the right tools, than to pay for it afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we find this. We have a culture where if people have been paged overnight, it's often the case that you'll wake up in the morning and someone's taking the pager off you. But that stuff is really hard to do if you don't have a process that exposes even that people are being paged. If no one can see it, then that can be really toxic because people are like, well, I put in the hours last night and no one's even mentioned it. And that's like, that cuts both ways, right? You're tired and now you're feeling like it's not appreciated. And yeah, good process can help uncover that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Earlier we touched on like really painful incidents that made you sort of realize that incident management processes and having a good one is really, really valuable. So I'm curious now, can you touch on an incident maybe that wasn't as painful, maybe that one that went really, really well, and to you was an example of, if we replicated this next time around, this will be amazing for us. Kareem, let's start with you.
So I think the best example here, this was when the Heartbleed vulnerability came out. All of us were on our way to the office. We were already chatting about what was happening. There were, I think, 4 or 5 of us, with 4 in the office, 1 person signing in remotely. And we just naturally split the roles. One person was going to take notes, and we'd rotate that because, 1, nobody wants to take notes when everyone else is doing the cool stuff of fixing it. And 2, it's nice to have different perspectives of this, right? Engineers build artisanal products. None of our stuff can be replicated, and it's only brilliant because we think it is. Nobody else ever thinks of our software the same way. So we had this nice little flow, incident command. We took notes while we went along. The person who was a scribe would also combine those notes and make sure it all worked well. And when we were done, we're like, well, this worked really well. We should, categorize that. So of course, being, the nerdy group that we were, we looked into, hey, some other people must have thought of that. And we pretty much 80% replicated what a good incident flow should look like, which was cool. But of course, we felt very proud having thought of this ourselves, only to realize that we just picked the most logical path, and it worked. And so from then on out, we used a similar-ish template, actually designed by somebody else. And what's it called? Etsy had this tool called Morgue, I think, an after action tracker, after incident review tracker that would give us access to our calendars and everything, and gave us some semblance of a structure. Feature-wise, Yeah, we're talking about maybe 15% of what you can find in incident. Um, yeah, it's we had to start somewhere as an industry, right?
Yeah.
Lawrence, before you answer, Kareem, I actually wanted to ask, is there a sense of frustration that comes up when you do something better the second time around and you're just like, why didn't we just do this the first time?
Sense of frustration, not so much. Sometimes it's more that you look at stuff that you did, and I think, like many engineers, I try to always write the best possible code off the moment. But I've definitely had moments where I'll look back into something I built and go like, why did I think that was the best possible solution? I could have probably Googled something better. That wasn't the case, but I think there's always this curiosity of figuring out, can we do this better? Not just for the goal of optimizing it, but for the goal of, I'm honing my craft, right? Am I getting better at this? And if not, why am I plateauing? What are things that I can be doing to up level?
Yeah.
So not frustration, more almost morbid curiosity.
Lawrence.
Yeah, I wanted to mention because I think you said you kind of organically stumbled upon something that worked, and I think that's I've seen this come up a bit recently. Like people have been talking about engineering management and stuff, and do you need managers and things like that. And I think like a lot of the processes that we apply kind of systematically across companies are kind of naturally trying to emulate what a group will do if they're high performing together anyway. Like systems are hierarchical and people do work in teams and they apply roles and it's how they get through work effectively. So yeah, it's kind of that aha moment of, oh wow, this is like how it's meant to work, is I think probably only something that comes after you've done this enough times and drilled like that type of work with that team to the point that you go, well, naturally we're slotting into the right positions here. But it feels really good when it happens. So I think, yeah, if I'm thinking of of an incident, I'm a bit recency biased here, but when we were preparing for this call, I think you'll remember that I my pages started going off and my phone was going a bit sideways because at that particular moment when we were discussing this, one of our customers who uses our status page, they got DDoSed. So they had a huge amount of requests sent to their site, and these kind attackers who decided to attack this customer of ours, they decided to attack their status page too, because that's a real one there. You want to get their status page so they can't talk to their own customers about the incident. So not great. But what this meant was while I was on the call, I was kind of watching my Slack light up and my phone was going off, but I was very much leaving this incident to the rest of the team, going, you know what, they'll handle this. This is all fine. But as soon as I got off the call, I went and joined the team who had, up until this point, been running an amazing incident inside of the Slack channel that we use to coordinate things. So they'd actually gathered in a war room in the office, and they were collaborating in person, but they were copying everything that they were doing and taking resources and putting it inside of the Slack channel. They'd also provided a load of updates throughout the incident. So I just turned up and I read the recent incident summary, and then I had a look at some of the graphs they've been sharing. Um, and it was just great. Like in this particular situation, we didn't have much impact for us, but obviously our customer was having a real bad time, and some of our support staff actually joined the incident channel, and they were going through the resources that we'd shared, and they found these graphs, and they're in contact with the customer themselves, and that customer, their infrastructure was hosed, so they can't see anything right now. So our CS team were actually taking the graphs that we had and then taking them from the incident channel and sharing them with the customer to give them a picture of the idea of the traffic that we were receiving. And I think that just like there's no additional effort that kind of went through to run the incident like that. It was just the default stance that this team has, having done this a lot and been very familiar with the tool because obviously they built the thing. So it's just really great to see. And I think it took us all of about, I think this happened in the evening, and then by midday the next day, we had written a post-mortem, we'd held the debrief, we then shared those learnings and socialized them around the team. So we'd added some more controls around observability and making sure that we have limits in our system. And that's the type of thing that you want to do. You want to have a distraction like that for most of the team to go, I know it's being handled and I know how to participate with this if I need to, because they're following the process, the updates are in the right place. You want it to be clear enough that people can jump in and out of the process as and when they're free. And then you want to basically get the learning out of the way and return to normal work as fast as you can after the incident is finished. And that's what having a process that ensures you have a touch point at all the right steps can make sure that you do in a pretty short fashion. And yeah, that for me was really well run and felt really good.
Yeah. Lawrence, I actually want to follow up on that. Is having CS be basically like fighting this fire with you, how common or unusual is that? Like, was that something that you experienced at GoCardless, or is that something that's more unique to your time here at Incident IO?
So it's something that I've been like very used to. So if we had issues impacting payments at GoCarless, you bring in the account manager or the CSM who manages the account. So
Sure.
they would be participating in the incident and following along so that they can communicate to the customer at the end of the day about how the incident's going to affect them. We had far less structure than we do at incident. Like we'll automatically tag the appropriate CSM here. When we say it's impacting this customer on an incident, they'll get a notification that's like, by the way, you probably want to check this out. But yeah, I think it's actually core to running incidents well. They're not just an engineering thing. This is something that impacts the whole of your company. You should bring everyone into the incident response process if that's at all possible.
That makes sense. So
100% agree. Sorry, I just have to butt in there.
yeah, for sure, definitely.
It is very much a process that everyone benefits from seeing. I think salespeople, be in there if you have the time, and if not, make the time, even if it's just to read the after action report to see what went on with your customer, what went on with adjacent customers, because let's say you're dealing with utility companies. If one of them has an incident, the others probably use very similar software, so they're
Yep.
likely to have the same problems. There's so much to learn, even if it's just that one sentence where you can go like, hey, I remember seeing this incident for this customer 5 months ago. Can we look this up? And maybe it's related. If that points us in the right direction, I think everyone wins.
You can also, if you manage this right, like incidents are obviously bad, but they can generate trust if you manage it correctly with your customer. You're far
Yeah.
more likely to do that if you brought in the person who has a relationship already with that customer and can tell you how is the best, like how do we best contact them, who should we be speaking to there. It helps you manage the incident a lot better. So there's no reason for me, I think, to isolate the people. Like bring as many people into the incident as you think is appropriate for the type of problem at hand.
Yeah, I'd love to like double tap on that just for a second. This idea, Lawrence, it was that you just said it, that an incident management is just an engineering thing. I'm wondering if both of you could just speak to the value of making it more sort of collaborative and bringing in the whole, as many people as it is appropriate, and what that ultimately helps you do. Lawrence, let's just start with you.
Yeah, so I guess people who work in fintech will be really aware of this, but loads of fintech incidents are then like it might have originated as a technical error. Maybe you've sent too much money in a particular place, or some other thing has happened. But the blast radius of that is really large, and it doesn't just hit engineering. Suddenly, you've got your finance team in, you've got your regulation, like regulations apply to you. Now you need to bring your legal team in and try and figure out who you need to report to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for me, incidents have always been much broader than engineering. And if you don't have a process that can help people kind of join them and catch up to what's going on, or you're deep in the technical weeds and you haven't done your work to make sure that you've communicated this out, then you're just doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah. Kareem.
I think not just are you doing yourself a disservice, you're doing your future teammates a disservice. And I think that's the hardest part. When we don't learn from incidents, we don't have material to go through, it makes it very hard in the future to plan better. I think once your company gets big enough to evolve its software, we're rebuilding it in a new language. Maybe we're completely throwing out the frameworks that we built. We're still going to be dealing with the underlying architecture and architectural choices. So we want to see what went wrong so we can do it better.
Yeah.
Unlike other handcrafted stuff, software engineering, our tools constantly change. The materials we work with constantly change. It's not so much, like pottery, where you're pretty much working with a similar mix all the time. For us, there's constantly something else that's going on. So the more information we have, the more well-structured information we have, the better it gets, the more we can learn. And, if you're the new person in the team, use your onboarding time to go through old incident reports, see what the team is running into, because, fresh pair of eyes, you're going to see patterns that maybe the team didn't pick up on, maybe, an AI didn't pick up on, as, like outlier detection didn't work correctly on that. It builds trust, it removes mistrust, and I think, like Lawrence, you said it correctly. It's a career accelerator for everyone who's involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see it kind of like good incident response, or like your ability to respond to incidents is kind of akin to your company's immune system. Like things will happen that will harm the company, and your ability to respond and like drum up a team that can actually tackle the problem is going to be key to whether or not you end up surviving or like you come out healthy at the end of it. And if you can bring more people and a broader range of people from across the company into your incidents more frequently, they're just going to get better at running these incidents, and the response will be smoother. Like Martin Fowler always says, like frequency reduces difficulty, and that applies in many cases. Incident response is definitely one of those where it applies most.
So, why is incident management and running incident management effectively so important? Like, how can teams make sure that they're running incidents as effectively as possible? Kerim, let's start with you.
Train like you play. Whenever we do recordings of videos, we do a test. When we do marathons, generally we train for it. I feel you on that. I've got an event coming up in a few months. I'm still working on the training for that.
Oh, me too. Me too.
We're going to do better if we train in the right way. If we can do
absolutely.
about 75% of it already, because once you can depend on, I want to say muscle memory, even though it's the brain that you're mostly using for those incidents, you're going to be much quicker at resolving it, because you don't have to figure out, well, where should I be clicking? Where should I be, noting things? How do I make sure the right information gets captured? Anything of that has a cognitive cost, and that takes away from solving the incident. Ultimately, if your company is big enough, that's going to be very easily expressed in dollars.
Yeah. I've
Lawrence.
like occasionally we'll run training sessions, which we call like game days or drills. And whenever I run these things, I tend to split the day in two. So in the morning, we end up running tabletop exercises where we'll go over like really simple hypothetical situations that will pretend to respond as if not actually responding to the problem. But I'll go like, the database is down. What are you going to do now? And then the team has to go, I'm going to take lead. I will do this, and you run through that. And you'd be amazed the first or second time that you run those tabletop exercises how many ways people trip over themselves. And I think that goes back to what you're saying, Kerim. It's like, if you don't train this stuff, then when you come to doing an incident, you're going to be spending so much time just thinking about like, what does scribe mean, that you'll be spending so much of your cognitive load on just the response, on the process of the incident, that you're taking away from your ability to respond to the actual problem. So that's why you want this training, and why you want it to happen frequently, and why people want to be intuitively familiar with your processes, so that they can be spending 90% of their concentration on the incident at hand rather than the 20%, because 80% is done with, oh, have I contacted the right people? Have I filled out the right form? That sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, if you go back to your question, Luis, it's like, why is incident management so important? I think we're not doing this for fun. Usually an incident is, there's something really serious going on that we have an obligation or responsibility to fix. It can be an existential threat for your company, or definitely for like your customers or anyone who might happen to be on the line at this point. Obviously, it's important we respond really well. And I think if you don't have a good process in place, it's very likely that you'll be spending so much of your time just trying to figure out what to do that you won't be able to do the thing effectively. So that's why I think that having an effective process in place is so important.
And just to wrap up, again, both of you have loads of experience managing incidents. But if you had to hone in on one thing, let's say you were starting this all over again, you were starting from scratch. What's the one thing that you would do to start managing your incidents better? Kerim.
I'm going to go with don't take shortcuts. No matter if you have a good tool to take notes or you're just updating a markdown file, take as many notes as you can. Copy paste code samples in there, copy paste whatever commands you're running. You can always sort it out later and figure out which of these are relevant, which of these should probably become easier accessible tools. But note everything down. You're going to think that 45 minutes from now, I'll remember putting it in as soon as the database migration runs, at which point you're going to go grab your coffee. And you're going to forget doing this. And there's no scribe around. There's no other people right now that are helping you, remind you of what's going on. So just take notes. Take notes all the time.
Lawrence?
Yeah, I think I always think this is this for me is a bit morbid, but like the analogy like works. So if you're on a plane and the mask dropped from the ceiling, you should put your mask on first before helping others. So that's kind of how I see incident process. I think when something happens that is an incident, so when your website goes down and everyone's panicking and everything's on fire, your temptation is always to just jump into the flames and try and fix it. If you do that without first making sure that you're following the process and like at least doing the like boilerplate things that you need to do to make sure that you can effectively respond, then honestly, you're probably just going to get burnt. And like you say, Kerim, it's like 40 minutes later, you go, what on earth did I do? Or like, I thought I could fix this in 5 minutes and like everything's still on fire now, but no one can help me because no one knows what I've done. So now I'm kind of like brick the door shut for myself. So yeah, like that's the analogy that sticks for me. Instant process, kind of put your mask on first before helping others.